we are about to get into the last module before we do a deep dive into what are the actual 12 tactics that really seem to be the focus of this book. And when you hear people talk about the book and shift, 99 times out of 100 when they talk about it, they're talking about the 12 tactics or one of the 12 tactics. I'm kind of a fan of Forward, the introduction, and this part one. So part one talks about shift happens. And the second part of part one is the law of equilibrium. The reason why I'm such a fan of the Forward, the introduction, and then this part one. Part two is the 12 tactics. The reason why I'm such a fan of them is they help properly set up, in my opinion, the mindset that we should be looking at everything. And so you're going to see one of those points right now, why I think that it does a great job with mindset. In Cultivate Wins, we constantly are talking about our 5x5, okay? Everything needs to be scalable, duplicatable, freakishly predictable. That's what you're about to go into with this chapter, for me anyways. Freakishly predictable, effective, and efficient. We don't want to do anything if it's not effective and efficient, okay? But we want everything that we do to be based on what can we predict. And I think a lot of times, and obviously Gary agrees with this, is that most people talk about a shift as though it's something that we can't predict. We even use the verbiage in real estate that, the market's unpredictable. We don't know. Well, really? Okay, maybe on a day-to-day basis, but don't you know, even think about the shift from an annual basis. Don't people even talk about it like they actually kind of know and it is predictable that it'll be a little slower at least 3 months out of the year? So don't tell me it's not predictable. You've already just stated, and the people in your office have stated, that we've got some months that are better than others, and that's just kind of a predictable routine. Everything's predictable. You may not know the details of it, but if you go look at the last year, last 2 years, last 3 years in your MLS, do you even know where to find that? Figure out, if you don't know, go get some help. Figure out where to find those numbers. Figure out how many closings you are having every single month, and do that for the last 3 years and see if there is a consistency of what months have the lowest volume of closings in unit numbers and financial as well, but unit numbers. Now, if you see that, are those months similar this year to what they were last year to what they were the previous year? Generally speaking, people are right. There is a little bit of predictability there. So don't tell me that the real estate market isn't predictable. Then the next thing, when we have a complete market shift, it's the economy. Do we know that at some point that's going to shift? Yes. Do we know what day? No. But what is predictable? Predictable is, and that's what he talks about in this chapter, it is predictable. It's going to happen. Whether it happens every 3 years, 5 years, or 8 years. What we know is that it is going to happen. And after it's happened and you've gotten through it and you're still in the business, because a lot of people won't be in the business anymore, it's going to happen again. Okay? So what he focuses on here is right in my wheelhouse. I want to figure out everything that is predictable. Not everything that's predictable do I have all the details about, but the fact that it's going to happen is predictable. So you want to already know that it's going to happen and put a game plan together around it. So here are a couple things that he talks about. When he talks about the shift happens, first one that he talks about, we've already hit on. There is seasonality, whether we want to say it or not. That doesn't mean that you can't succeed and achieve your goals based on seasonality. If you already know that it's happened, you can actually put a plan in place to deal with that and not only say suffer, go along with that seasonality, but you could actually thrive. That's what this book is about. It's not about surviving, it's about thriving. So if you're taking notes right now, I would write down, I'm not here to survive, I'm here to thrive. This is about thriving. Okay, so he talks about that quite a bit here. So here's another quote from the bottom here, and I'll just read this and what my notes were on it. It says, seasonal cycles feel predictable. Focus in on the word feel for these next couple of sentences. It's about the feeling. That's what we base our business on most of the time. And most of the people that base their business on feeling are not in this business by next year or the next 3 years. This isn't about feeling, okay? So seasonal cycles feel predictable, short-term, and manageable. They feel predictable, short-term, and manageable. Economic shifts feel unpredictable, undefined, indefinite, and overwhelming. They feel that way. One feels like business as usual, and the other feels, well, downright scary. Get over your feeling and realize that these are predictable. So he talks about that here, that one feels predictable, one feels unpredictable. And I wrote, it is predictable that they will happen. It's an opportunity to thrive if you are prepared and have a plan for a shift. So what he starts to do is then break down in here. There are a couple things we need to understand even what a shift is. And he breaks it down very, very simply here. They occur whenever supply and demand move out of balance. A shift occurs when the market moves from one to the other. Think of it this way. A shift occurs when the market moves from one to the other. One to the other of what? What's he talking about? The fact is there are buyer's markets, there's balanced markets, and there's seller's markets. And a shift happens when it moves from, say, a buyer's market to a seller's market. That's what a shift is, very simply defined. And it's going to happen. So plan for it, okay? So what you can do a simple little test for yourself, is what I mentioned before. Go to your MLS and see what your annual shifts even look like. Know your numbers. Know the data. Know how to find the data. Now, in Cultivate Wins, we always talk about efficiencies. Is we want to be able to achieve anything that we want to achieve and find anything that we need to find within 30 seconds or less. Do you know your MLS well enough that if you're in the MLS, you could quickly pull up a report in 30 seconds or less, because it's possible in most MLSs, to go ahead and go to the right place and know how many closings have happened in the last 30 days, or in the last month, or in the last quarter, or for every month over the last 12 months? Can you pull that stuff up that quickly? Do you know how to use your tools that well? So go to your tools, pull up that information, and look at that over the last 2 to 3 years and see where is the consistency. He's talking about consistency here. Shifts happen, and they're fairly predictable, more predictable than we give them credit, okay? Whether we may not know the exact time on the national level, but that's what he starts to get into here, is going to be national versus local. Now, when we see a shift on a national level, it seems to kind of happen slowly. And when I say slow, I'm using a relative term based on what he's using in the book. I agree with that. Nationally, the shift kind of happens and it's a gradual thing. Locally, though, it can feel like it happens in a couple weeks, in a month. And that's what happens when we talk about seasonality. And that's what happens sometimes when we talk about things happening to the economy. We know it's coming, we're seeing it, it feels gradual across the country, but then locally, all of a sudden, it feels like it changed overnight. And that's what he's trying to point out in here. And that brings him to his next point. Understand that, yes, the market shifts locally, it shifts nationally. Understand that what you see nationally could change and feel like it changes overnight in your local market. So he points that out. Now, what that does, and I like what he points out here, that creates actual opportunity for you, okay? The fact is, if it changes and it feels like it changes pretty drastically and pretty abruptly in your local area, there are going to be people that are not prepared for that, are not ready to do the right actions, like what we talked about in previous chapters. It's not just about doing extra. You may have to put in some extra effort during these shifts. Extra effort does not in any way, shape, or form mean extra hours. It means becoming crazy, purposeful, and intentional about putting extra effort in, but taking that extra effort and putting it in the right places. Now, if you are part of that 20-80 rule and you're part of the 20%, you're going to take your extra effort, you're going to put them in the right areas and stop doing the things that weren't bringing the results. You're going to start in one of the tactics talking about really focus on your financing, okay, and putting your money where it matters and where it's getting real results, okay? Those types of things. And what he talks about in the law of equilibrium, this is where the opportunity comes for you. Now, I told you, go run the stats in the MLS. If you see your lowest 1, 2, or 3 months per year, look at how many you want to close per month and look at what that percentage is. Now, that percentage tells you what your market share will be for the total number of closings. If you can get that market share that you are desiring and that you want, because it is doable, a bunch of people, when the market gets tough, are not going to stay in this business. So when they leave, whatever market share they had is now available. So if you have that market share that you so desire during the slowest months, and when the market starts to come back, you can hold that market share, you've created an amazing opportunity that during this shift, you didn't actually just survive, you actually thrived, and he will dive into that. So I'll just read a couple statements, and I put it's all relative. Conversely, when the numbers of available transactions falls, so does the number of agents. When it gets tough and the number of transactions fall, so do the number of agents, they fall away. But look at those numbers of transactions going down and look at what you want to close. What's your goal? What percentage of the market is that? It's still a very small number, so it's very doable for you. People are attracted to the industry by perceived income and opportunity and driven out by the reality of the competition for it. Perceived income opportunity. So when things are really hot, or is a lot of people like to talk about the market's hot, okay? A lot of people get into the business and they see that as opportunity. This book is helping you see that when the market, when people aren't talking about it being hot, it's a shift, it's hard. That's when you can see this as your opportunity, your time of opportunity. I love that thought process. Okay. So anyways, that is a lot of what I get out of these couple of chapters. We absolutely have the ability to look at these with a different mindset. And with that, I'm going to go right back to the beginning and let's read that first statement that he started this book with, because I think it's very relative to this section. You cannot control what happens to you. You can't control what happens to you. You can't control what happens in the market. That doesn't mean that you can't predict that it will happen. Okay? Just because you can't control what happens doesn't mean you can't predict that it happens. If it happens on a regular basis, it happens seasonally, or whether it happens every 3 to 5 to 8 years, if you know that it's going to come, that's fairly predictable. Okay? You cannot control what happens to you, but you can control your attitude. That's what we're talking about. But you can control your attitude towards what happens to you. And in that, you will be mastering change rather than allowing it to master you. So now you see why I love these first couple of sections. So forward, the introduction, and then this part 1 that talks about the shift and the equilibrium. I think they're amazing to help set us up for the 12 tactics. So now let's go talk about those 12 tactics. Thanks, guys.